Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here again, wishing you a happy new year and hope that MSU's road win in Columbus fills you with as much joy as it does me. Spartans won 69-62 in a hard-fought win in Columbus against a good team and one that was favored to win. Before we begin, we'd like to thank all of you who support the show through recurring gifts at the Mateen Cleaves level. Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, Mike Huntoon, Draymond Green supporters, Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Scott Driscoll, Doug Robinson, Daniel Dranak, and Joe Hollis, and all the Scott Scott supporters, as well as Ruth Dragenheim and Kenneth Cromet on Substack. If you're interested in supporting the show, you can head on over to the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support, where you can find the necessary links. All right, Rod, let's talk about the game against the Buckeyes. Any win on the road is a big one, but this one felt a little bigger, partly because this was the only time you're going to see them, and partly because we've seen so many other Big Ten teams struggle and falter on the road. And so getting 3-0 to start the Big Ten season obviously is a huge, if you have aspirations for winning the Big Ten, obviously, but also in seeding for the NCAA tournament, which I know everyone gets kind of worried about that, making the tournament. Now I think it's sort of like seeding positioning. So this is going to be a quad one win almost for sure. And so that's obviously very helpful in that sort of process. It was a game where Michigan State led most of the way and 37-29 at the break. Which was in part due to a strange disappearance of Bruce Thornton, who went into the locker room. And I'm sure there's reports by now that have come out that I've not had a chance to see, but so he left for a stint, and it was an important one as the Buckeyes were kind of sort of like an even game up to that point. Michigan State was maybe up by 2 or so, and they just could not get anything done without him. And when he left the court, their guards were just chewed up both ends by Michigan State, which is not surprising. That's what we expect, but because just how good Bruce Thornton is. So they came out, and then they came out of the halftime hot, built a big lead up to about 14, 15 points. And then it just fell apart with a big, huge run from Ohio State. They got actually a 1-point lead at 50-49. Through the conventional way runs happen on the road, turnovers, giving up offensive rebounding, bad shot selection on offense, and just kind of like the frenetic sort of defense from the team that's on the run. And so anyway, Michigan State recovered from that, scored 6 straight points, partially on that and one with Booker, which impressive, dribbled 3/4 of the court and ended up just, I think, laying it in. They recovered, scored after that, won the game by 6 over Ohio State, mainly with Ohio State just contributing a lot of turnovers. So Ohio State falls to 9-5, 1-2 in the Big Ten. Michigan State is now 12-2 overall and 3-0 in the Big Ten. So, again, any win you can get in Columbus, I think, is a good one. They've won there before, but this seemed like a really good one, especially heading back home against Washington. And it's a game that you could get, but certainly they weren't favored.
Yeah, they were a slight underdog, and you're absolutely right about the bottom line. The headline from this is you win on the road. That's a good win. I mean, look, a team that I've been very impressed with so far this season, Maryland. I watched go into Seattle last night and play a Washington team that I've seen play a few times this year already. And really, and I think we've talked about it here a little bit. It's kind of been a toss-up to me at this stage as to which is the worst team in the league between Minnesota and Washington. Now, each team has some individuals that are very, very good players. And as you pointed out on the Spartan Mag board today, and it's absolutely correct, I said the difference between this Big Ten and some Big Tens of the past is even the worst teams have enough big-time talent on the rosters that on a given night they can pull one off. Well, Washington did that last night. They beat a Maryland team that, as I say, I've been very impressed with, and they took care of business at home. And so Maryland has a road loss that, you probably, if you're them, you're looking at the schedule and you're thinking, well, we probably know we're not going unbeaten on the road. And if we want to contend in this league, we've got to hold home court. And then you figure most years you try to more or less split on the road.
Right. Yeah.
So come close to that. So in a 20-game schedule these days, you'd hope to go 5-5 and figure 15-5, 14-6 puts you in the mix at the top of the league. But Washington's one of the games that you've got to have if it's on your schedule, and they couldn't get it.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. Any road win is a big win. And Michigan State's got 2 of them now. The first one, Minnesota, was one in that category I just mentioned, where if you're Michigan State, you're figuring, okay, It's not going to be handed to us. But if we're going to get road wins, one in Minneapolis looks like it's on the easier side as
Right.
compared to some
Exactly.
others. So they took care of that game fairly easily. And then this one, as we talked about in the preview, Ohio State's been on sort of a roller coaster for a few different reasons during the course of this season already. But it felt like Michigan State was catching them at a point where they had maybe started to figure some things out. They came in riding a 3-game win streak. They'd won those 3 games by an average of 21 points per, including a 20-point win over a pretty good Kentucky team. So that was the concern. Like, all right, you're facing an Ohio State team that's sort of finding itself now. You're playing in their building, which in my opinion is not one of the tougher road environments in the league, but it's still the road. And I
Yes,
believe
exactly.
Michigan State's on I don't know how many in a row they've lost in that building, but I want to say it might be like 3 or 4.
I don't
And
think it's been, I feel like the year they
they
lost
lost
with
last
AJ
year.
but the year before that, I think they won because I think they
Okay.
won it. They were up like 20 or 30 and they ended up getting it down to like 10, but because I think Ohio
And
State
then
was
they
in the dregs and then they lost in the Big
lost
Ten tournament.
Big Ten tournament. You're
Yep.
correct.
I think
Okay.
that's it.
That's it. But it's been a run of losing maybe 3 out of 4, something like that. Because I know they got blasted the year or 2 before that in
Yes.
Columbus. I remember vividly. So it has, but regardless, it's not a building that you feel like, wow, you're not running into Mackey or State Farm Center, I think they call it now, Assembly Hall. It will always be in my mind, and Champaign Urbana, or Kohl Center.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have that feel to it. So if you're Michigan State, then okay, quality team. They're maybe starting to find themselves, and they present some real problems with that roster. They're, Bruce Thornton for starters, but you'd hope that you might have a shot at stealing one, and they did. And as you say, they were in control. I mean, you don't want to say that it felt like they had the game won all the way, but they were in the lead for the majority of that game.
Yeah.
But yet it wasn't enough to stop Ohio State from making their runs, which is what you would expect. You noted them struggling that little segment that Thornton was out, and Thornton still played 36 minutes
I know that was
in
the
this
point.
game.
He said they were
Um,
just destroyed with him
and
off the
and
floor.
he had a rough night, which we
Yes.
can talk about. I think Michigan State did a hell of a job on him because that is a very good player, believe you me. But um, it does show that Ohio State has a problem that Michigan State is fortunate enough to not have, which is when their main guy sits down for whatever reason, and you could see a game down the line where maybe it's foul trouble
Sure.
that sits
Yeah.
him down for a segment, right? Or he
Hmm.
gets a minor injury that he's got to sit out a 4-minute segment while
Right.
he gets his ankle right. Who knows? Um, they've got some good guards, but I don't know that I believe that they've got another point guard. And
Well, we
that
saw that they
and
didn't.
yeah, and that may be where they suffer a little bit. Michi Johnson, I don't think is truly a point guard either, but I do think he's a little more suited than their other guys, than like Mobley, for example. So
Yeah.
this may be a situation where they actually did suffer a little bit more than in some other games by virtue of his absence. But it just goes to show you, like, that position is so critical for most teams. But for Michigan State, if they have Jeremy in foul trouble, not playing well, they got 2 other options, not one, 2 others in Trey Holloman, and I think most people feel reasonably confident in what Jace Richardson could do if he has
Yeah.
to be called
And a
on.
half, you could have another half with Akins.
Right, but yeah, so it is a difference, and it's a difference between these 2 teams. That Ohio State, really, it's that guy or nothing, and if something happens to that guy, they're probably going to struggle. And, again, they're a much better defensive team this year than they've been recently. But to me, that Ohio State is still a team that's going to have to go out and win games primarily on the offensive end. I feel
Yeah.
better about them offensively than defensively. And if their floor leader is absent for a while, that's gonna have a big impact. So I think it's a gutty win for Michigan State. You and I were talking before we started recording, and there were there were enough things that you look at that box score and you say, man, Michigan State just did not do this very. They didn't shoot the three very well at all. Um,
It's an understatement.
they gave up way more offensive rebounds than I ever would have believed possible against an Ohio State team that frankly does not rebound well. That was a big area coming into this game where we thought, all right, that should be advantage Michigan State. And it wasn't. Turnovers, thankfully Ohio State had their own problems, but Michigan State again, 16 turnovers.
Yep.
And in a game that wasn't really played super fast, that's not good. And so
Yep.
you look at all of those things, you're like, well, how the hell did they win? Well, I think what you point to, once again, the free throw line performance, both getting there and making them.
Yep.
What were they, 18 for 22? That's lights out. I
Yeah.
mean, the beat goes on, and getting 22 attempts is a big deal. On the road, that's a big deal. That's something we talked about. Like, what kind of whistle are they going to get? Well, I think Michigan State's aggressiveness played well for them.
Yep.
The defense, big part of this win, because again, Ohio State's a very capable offensive team. They're not a flawless or a complete offensive team. I don't think they're not great in terms of the impact that their size or lack thereof has, but they do shoot twos well. They shoot threes incredibly well, and yet Michigan State largely contained them in this game. And
Yeah.
I just think, Michigan State, I think, also got a lot of good play out of its bigger players.
Yes.
Zapala, the eighth different guy to
Yeah.
lead the team in scoring in a game this year. If that isn't an absolute clear cut sign of the depth that this team has, I think that's the best illustration of it. That they can have that many guys, and they're not done yet. I could see a game that could be
Fears.
weird where, yeah, Jeremy Fears leads team in scoring in a game. Sure, you could see that. Who's the other one who hasn't? Maybe Cooper.
Cooper, I suppose he had his career high 15 last. It's hard to see him that being enough
But
to win a game. But yeah, who
but,
knows?
but you never know. I mean, would you have bet on Zapala doing it? Probably
No.
not.
No.
So it's not impossible. We could say maybe it's less than 50% likely, but it's not impossible. They could have 10 guys who
Yeah.
do that by the time it's over. But Zapala in this game, great on pick and roll. You lose track of how many dunks he had. You mentioned that play from Book, and I thought Book it's a nice bounce back game from him. And what's really impressive and important is he did it on a day where the three wasn't falling for him.
Yeah.
That's the knock on Xavier, right? That if the
Hmm.
three's not falling early, he just kind of goes into a funk and you don't see the effort and you don't see the production. Well, that wasn't true today. Jackson Kohler with something of a bounce back game. I think what do you have,
Hmm.
8 and 10? I think so.
Yep.
That's quality basketball from those guys. And if you include Cohen Carr in that group, it looks even better because
Yeah.
once again, Cohen showing up 11 points. He only had 3 rebounds, but the 11 points, you'll take 7 for 8 at the line. 7 for 8 at the line from this guy. I think the days of being worried about him as a free throw shooter, has he done enough yet to
I,
convince
well,
that?
I was just looking at his numbers here. So this is, it's so he had made 21 in a row until he finally missed his last free throw attempt.
Right.
So he had gone from 11 for 26 for the season at
Uh-huh.
42.3%, and he is now 32 of 48 for 66.7%. I know I've never seen a player who improved
Yeah.
in season that dramatically. I mean,
Yeah.
because and I remember talking to you earlier this year saying, this guy's got to start hitting some free throws. If he doesn't, people are just going to kill him because there's no consequence for, hacking the heck out of
Right.
this guy. But
Right.
now he's almost turned into like a Frankie Fiddler. He's just like
He's
drawing the
becoming a
contact,
weapon.
going right through people. And he's now hitting at the line. I mean, it is impressive. I mean, that shot's going to come at some point, the outside shot, and whether it's
Yeah.
this year
Yeah.
or, I mean, I guess you'd say he wasted 2 or 3, but he definitely he had a jumper, which was very bad. But he definitely had 21. And I think when he hit that 21st, I'm sure he was thinking, hey, I've hit 21 in a row because he barely drew front iron that last one.
Yeah.
But pretty impressive what that kid has done.
Yeah, and you just, as you say, the aggression that he's playing with, so the total package has come together where he's now capable of taking the ball to the basket. So it's not just lobs and transition plays. Like he's a weapon in the half court now.
Yeah.
Teams have to deal with him, and he's fearless. He's going to go hard at everybody because, as you
Yes.
say, if they put him on the line now, well, he's going there with a ton of confidence, and why not? He's basically one more solid game from getting above 70% on the
Oh
year.
yeah.
I mean, he's
Yeah.
right there. So you're now at a point where this entire team essentially you really can't foul. I mean, Zapala 1 for 1 today. He's the low man in the rotation in terms of his performance at the line, and I don't look at him as a bad free throw shooter. I forget where he's at right now. He might be
He's
a
about
little bit below 60.
he's I think at 60, but I mean
Okay.
not yeah.
So if that's your worst free throw shooter
And he doesn't shoot
in a
much.
in a 10-man rotation, yeah, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just I think this was a game that you can say the bigs had a major impact. Other than Carson, who didn't do a lot, everybody else made major contributions. I thought Jeremy Fears, you know, defensively sets the tone. You look at his line apart from the defense: 6 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists. That's getting it done. That's getting it done. Hit a three, and slowly but surely, it feels to me like Jeremy is establishing that 3 point shot, not necessarily as a weapon, but as something that I think defenses are going to have a hard time not accounting for him. I think we're
Yeah.
starting to get to the point where defenses are going to have to really, and they're not playing off him like say the way teams guarded Tum, but I think they're going to have to start guarding him differently because he's
Yeah.
he's showing enough reliability with that shot. If you leave him open, that I think at some point opponents are just going to say, "All right, we got to treat this guy basically as if he's Trey Holloman or Jaden Akins. It's going to be in the same ballpark, right?" So
Yeah.
big games from them. I think I don't want to overlook Jaden. Um, Struggled again from three, but 14 points, 5 for 6 at the line in his own right. So
Mhm.
big
Well, and
point.
he had that big basket late.
Yep.
Well, so he had the transition where he just scored 1 on 3 with that amazing scoop layup, but also late he had that basket where they were just struggling. They weren't getting anything going, and he just took his time. He went in, got a nice, I don't know, it was like a 6 foot shot or something like that. But it was
Yep.
it
Yep.
his he looks not like he has the previous years where he has a lot of confidence that he can go get something that's gonna be quality. He took one bad, jumper early in this, I think it was early in the second half during that stretch when everyone was missing things. I think that's when it was. But other than that, he's playing just like you expect a freshman or a senior to play for Tom Izzo
Yeah.
team. A guy who knows what his role, and he's not out there trying to score a million points. I mean, has decent volume, but you actually expect him to with the 3 point shooting. But he's a good steadying force out there, and of course defensively, he's been fantastic as well.
For sure. I mean, I think Jaden right now is playing about as well as I had because I didn't buy the idea that he was going to all of a sudden be a 20 point a night guy. He's capable of doing that in any given night,
Mhm.
but I would say his overall floor game, basically, basically since Maui, has been right at the higher end of the level I had hoped for.
Yeah.
You know, where he might still be their number one option, but on this team that doesn't mean very much when you got a team 8 different guys in what is it 14 games can lead the team in scoring. it
Right.
doesn't it doesn't mean a ton to say well number one option, but you feel like you know what you're going to get from him now. There's not the erratic as much of the erratic 15 points, 3 points,
Yeah, you
in
don't feel like
back-to-back
he's
games.
forcing stuff like he did.
No,
Like
and
you're like,
that
okay, it's
too.
time for me to go get my whatever
He
I got to
doesn't
expect.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. It does not, it feels like a guy who's for the first time in a while playing freely. And as
Yeah.
you say, he has the confidence to believe that he can go get his when they need him to, but he's not forcing that. I mean, tonight, what did he took 10 shots.
10
You
shots. Yeah.
know, that's fine. That's totally fine, you know. Um, I think the only guy I thought, Cooper and Fiddler didn't do very much, but they also didn't play very much. The only guy who I thought maybe Trey didn't have a huge game either,
No.
but the only guy who I thought really did kind of struggle compared to what we've come to expect from him was Jace Richardson.
Yes.
Three turnovers, 3 points. He was 1 for 5 from the floor, 1 for 2 at the line, 0 for 3 from triples. That's shocking because he's been shooting north of 50% from three the
Yes.
whole year. So just kind of an off game for him. But again, it points to the depth. You look at this and you say, well, we didn't get much from Jace. We didn't get much from Trey. And those are two important guys. But it doesn't really matter that much because you've got Jeremy doing what he did. You've got Jaden Akins doing what he did. You have all the bigs showing up and contributing what they did, including Cohen. Um, that's enough to get you the win. So you have to be very happy with the way that any big time conference is, and this Big Ten is no different. Man, you go on the road anywhere and you get a win. That's something to treasure. And for Michigan State, it's the beat goes on. They're 3-0 in the league. They've got, and I want to refresh my memory here. When you look at what's upcoming, so you got Washington at home.
And then at
You're at
Northwestern.
Northwestern, which is tricky. Northwestern's capable, especially at home.
Hmm.
But then you're home against Penn State. You're home against Illinois, who is a very good team, but you're home.
Yep.
You're at Rutgers at Madison Square Garden, and then you're home against Minnesota, and that's your month of January.
Yeah.
Honest to God, and that's not taking anything for granted, but you can see this team. You can see a path to them being, what would that make them? Make it 4, 5, 6,
7 and
7,
0.
8.
8 and 0.
You could
Yeah.
see it. You could see a path to them being 8-0 going into Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I'm not predicting that, but not yet. But but you could see that path. And if it was flipped, like if they were going into Champaign,
Yeah.
okay,
Right.
that's a tougher.
Mhm.
But getting that team at Breslin, look, and Illinois went out to Eugene and just
Annihilated them.
and to use the recent Lions
Duck
terminology
soup.
they've been tossing around, belt to ass. It was that, but it's going to be a different story at Breslin. I'll just say that Michigan State's not Illinois and beat Michigan State by 20 some 30 some points
Yeah.
at Breslin. In East Lansing, I like Michigan State's chances in that game. I honestly, of that whole run, and some of those teams are capable. Certainly Penn State's off to a good start, but that's at Breslin.
Yeah.
The game at Northwestern is
I agree.
probably
That might be tricky.
that's a tricky one because that's a team that they're not catching a lot of attention from people thus far, and the record in terms of starting in the league is a bit rough. But they got Illinois in Evanston. They took them out in overtime, and they've lost a couple tough games since then on the road. Um, that team in Evanston I worry about, but regardless, there's a path at a minimum. Even if you say not 8-0, Michigan State, by all rights, if they do what we would expect them to do, based on what they've shown us to date, they should come out of January in pretty good position. The
Yeah.
schedule is set up. It would be different if you were looking like, all right, we got to go to West Lafayette, and then we got to go to Los Angeles for a couple games, and then, we're hosting Illinois, and we're hosting,
Right.
we're
Right.
hosting Michigan, and if it was loaded up that way, now February is going to be a different deal
Hmm.
in some ways, but January right now, and that's why this felt like such a big game in some ways, because it's a game that you knew was losable if you didn't play well.
Yep.
Like Ohio State was certainly capable of getting it at home, especially. But if you can get it, man, now you're starting to feel something,
Yeah.
and they are, and they should. They should feel very good about the basketball they're playing right now and where they sit.
Yeah. I have a couple of comments. So one is, today I think you look at the stats, but I think what really comes down to is a really, really good defensive performance.
Yeah.
I guess you can't say great because, of course, you have to clean up those possessions, and that's really where Ohio State stayed in the game and even took that brief little lead with getting some open shots. But in the regular half court, they were suffocating. And what's really impressive is you have Zapala, Kohler, and Cooper to some extent, although he didn't play a lot. And even Booker, really, they were unable, Ohio State was unable to get anything going with their guards. They were sealing people off. They were doing the switch. They're switching well, rolling great. I mean, it was really hard for Ohio State to get anything good looks. And
Well, look,
and look
look,
at what Devin,
here's the
what
thing.
Kohler did on Devin Royal and Booker, I mean Carr and Booker. They basically prevented him from doing anything except just get to the free throw line a couple times.
Yep. Yeah. And you look at it, look, 7 for 27 from three for a team that's shooting 39% to hold them
Right.
basically just a shade, whatever it was, 26%.
Yeah.
That's great. But then this is the other one. That team has also shot very well from two, despite
Hmm.
not having a real post threat. 15 for 33 from two, sub 50%.
Yeah.
That is doing a job.
Yeah.
Now you're right. The rebounding, 15 offensive rebounds, 18 second chance points. Very unlike a Michigan State team that has been an elite defensive rebounding group thus far. That said, this game back to back with the Western game, Tom Izzo, I guarantee you, is going to be hammering these guys before Washington comes to town
Yeah.
to get back on track because that's two back-to-back performances that were not great. And in this game, as you say, it kept Ohio State in it.
Oh yeah. This game could easily have turned the other way if not for Ohio State really struggling, turning the ball over too. And that was largely, I know that Michigan State didn't get credit with a lot of steals, but there were a lot of, shot clock violations. They were, throws out of bounds,
Yeah.
guys stepping out of bounds, just because they were causing so much disruption on the defensive end. And I would say the other thing about the game, when you were talking earlier about Jeremy Fears, is just how good he is with the roll man, getting dunks. I mean, getting great passes to whether it's Kohler, Sapala, Cooper, whoever it happens to be, or finding Carr. He is so much better than we've seen in recent years. And I mean, I don't know if he's better than Winston because he was really good with Tillman. They kind of
No, but I'll tell you what.
But I wonder if he'll get there and surpass him at some point.
This is his first full season of play.
Right, exactly.
So I like his odds.
Yeah.
And he's in that category. Now he's not the total player Cash was at this point, and that's a high bar. But in that one phase, having a feel for the pick and roll game, because it's some of it is truly that. I believe this. Some of it is you either have that innate feel or you don't.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that comes down to a sense of timing, to a sense of connection with your teammates, kind of a mental connection. And you build that, it's not too different in some ways than in football where they talk about, so going back to the Lions, it's something that they've talked about a lot this year, that the difference in chemistry between Jared Goff and Jameson Williams is much different this year than it's been previously.
Sure.
Now, why is that? Well, it's in large part, it's because of the work they've put in together, that they finally feel comfortable enough that they know what each other are going to do. And they know it's a result of reps. I mean, I've heard Goff say that. And I do think in this area we're talking about in basketball, sometimes it's about that too. But I also think, you look at Zapalo did so much damage tonight on that play. He hasn't had that much time with Jeremy. It's because he just got here in the summer.
Right.
So some of it is reps. I don't want to take away from the work ethic part, but some of it is just you have that feel or you don't. And we've seen guys at Michigan State who did not have that feel.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremy Fears is one of them who does. So was Cassius Winston. It's just it when you see it, and you're seeing it with Jeremy Fears, no question.
Yeah. Well, and Michigan State now, their defensive efficiency is up to 17th. At least I'm looking at Torvik right now, which is in large part due to not just Jeremy, but sort of just but certainly the guard defensively are so
Look,
much better, I think,
he's
than,
yes.
certainly compared to Cassius. As much as we love Cassius, the one thing he couldn't do is defend the
No,
weight,
not
right?
like this. Jeremy Fears is such an important tone setter. It's funny, and I don't think I've brought this up, and I've meant to, but I listened to Tom Izzo talk about Jeremy Fears in his particularly in his pregame press conferences where he's kind of doing the casual meet thing with local media,
Yeah,
usually
against the
at
stanchion.
Breslin. Yes, exactly, leaning
Yeah.
against the stanchion, and he's constantly talking about how, yeah, Jeremy's okay, but I'm kind of waiting for him to get full confidence back in his athletic ability. And we're starting to see signs here and there, but it's not all the way back yet. I know what he's talking about, but I really, and look, I would never quite, Tom Izzo knows what strings he's pulling and buttons he's pushing, so I would never, he knows far better than I do. But I would just say, this guy is such a tone setter at both ends. He is the primary reason, not the only reason, but he's the starting point for why their transition game is better, much better this year. That's
Yes.
my opinion, but I believe that. I think he is the main reason why, or again, a main reason why their 2-point production is so much improved. Why? In part because what we were just talking about. But it's other plays too. It's him making sure that he's getting the ball on time and where shooters want it. And that could be guys in the post, that could be guys on lobs, that could be guys coming off a pick for a mid-range jumper, whatever it is. He's the orchestrator. And then I think he is the tone setter on defense because he goes out and he is just fine with taking that opposition point guard. And he's already guarded a lot of good players. He's got a lot more to come. But I'll tell you what, tonight, he isn't going to see anybody in this league better than the guy he saw tonight. Braden Smith, there's a good argument, is right there with Thornton. I wouldn't disagree with people who see it that way, but I don't believe Braden Smith is better than Thornton.
No, I don't think so. All right, well let's talk a little bit about Bruce Thornton since he came up. He's a player brought to you by the Brothers of Justice Gutters. So Michigan State needed to keep in the gutter. Brothers of Justice Gutters, I know it's snowing there. I know it's sub-zero. So this is a good time to remind you that Brothers of Justice Gutters do more than just clean out your gutters and put leaf guards on. They fix, repair things. I mean, they do all those things. There's no question about that. But they also have the heaters to put on the gutters to melt the ice and snow so you don't have problems like icicles and things building up in your gutters. So if you're interested in that sort of service, you can talk to Kurt or Greg. You also get 10% off as a listener of the show. So give them a call. You can find the ways to contact them for an estimate at our support page at tffinots.com/support, whether you're on the east or the west side of the state. So they can hook you up with that. Or of course, if you just need regular gutter service, they'll come out even in crazy weather like this. The only time I think they're not out is if it's unsafe, like in the middle of a blizzard, I suppose, or like a sleet storm or something like that. But they go out and even when it's raining and stuff, because that's, kind of the point of being out with gutters. So the player Michigan State need to keep in the gutter with Bruce Thornton. And I think, sometimes we're like, kind of equivocal. Do they keep in the gutter? Do they not? I don't think there's any question Bruce Thornton was kept in the gutter for this game, for how important he is to Ohio State and their offense. He was 3 for 9 from the field. He was 0 for 5 from three. And there were not any good looks that he had. I mean, he had to
Yeah.
force a lot of those. 4 for 6 from the line, only finished with 10 points, had 3 rebounds, 2 assists, 5 turnovers. And this is a guy, I think, had 17 turnovers in the whole season
Yep.
coming into this game.
He had close to a 5-to-1 ratio going.
And
It
I
was
think,
it was a little over like 4.5-to-1.
yeah. And this was
And he was
not him
negative.
it was not him making mistakes in the sense that it wasn't like, unforced errors. This was he was trying to get things going, really fighting through around screens and trying to get downhill and just dribbling into trouble, and then getting in there and making mistakes, which is not something that he usually does, right?
Yep.
And so that was really impressive. He did finish with 2 steals, had no blocks. So I don't think without question, and he didn't seem injured. I think that was, he left the locker room, came back, he seemed fine, except, just didn't play great. So anyway, so I think they did a great job keeping the gutter, and that's largely why Michigan State was able to stay in the game and then mount that lead, and eventually they cruising at the end of the game.
Well, look, I think that anytime you're talking about an opposing team's best player being their point guard, that creates a very difficult situation for you because normally, if that guy's a scorer too, you mentioned Cassius Winston. You think about what Cassius Winston meant. Teams playing Michigan State in that era had to know, okay, this is their best scorer, but he's also going to get everybody else involved too and make everybody else better. So
Right.
if you don't deal with that guy, you got a problem because not only is he hurting you individually, but he's going to make everybody else around him able to hurt you more also.
Exactly.
And that's what Thornton has been this year. You know, he's the head of the snake. So for Michigan State to hold this guy 7 points under his average, to turn him negative in the assist to turnover department, that's because the 5 turnovers are one thing, that's a problem. But he only had 2 assists.
Yeah.
So he had less than half his normal assist total also.
Yeah.
That tells you the story. You know, the free throws, he got to the line basically, he averages about
He
6 free throw attempts per
got
game,
there
and he
6 times.
got 6, but he missed a couple. That's not
Yep.
Michigan State doing that, but that, you know, it could have been, you know, sometimes it's the total effect of how the game is going that plays
Sure.
into that too. It can be. So yeah, hats off to Michigan State defensively. It starts with Jeremy Fears. He's not the only one, but he did a hell of a night's work, in my opinion, and helped by others in taking care of a very, very good player.
Yeah, without a
Believe
doubt.
me, Bruce Thornton, I feel very confident in saying this. There are not going to be many nights in the Big Ten the rest of the way where Bruce Thornton's going to have a worse numbers line than this. So
Yeah,
that's testament to what Michigan State did.
I don't know who they play next, but I don't think I'd want to be that team because I think
No,
he's going to come out. He's going to look a lot
he's
better.
he's coming off 2 huge games.
Yeah.
He was fantastic against Kentucky and Indiana State, and you know Michigan State took care of business.
I mean, the guy's almost shooting 50% from three, goes over 5. So yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So the next part is who cleans the glass best, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, who definitely will clean your glass best, your windows, whether it's your house, your business, high rise. Maybe the guy is the manager of the state capitol. The Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids can take care of that. They also cover Kalamazoo area a little bit too. So if you're on the west side of the state anywhere and you're looking to get your windows cleaned, or maybe you want to get your house washed, although maybe right now it's maybe not the first thing in your mind, you certainly can get a hold of them as well. They also do interior painting during the winter, so this is a good time if you want a room or two that just touched up. Give the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids a first call, get an estimate from Troy and his team. They're super nice. They're like the nicest guys, and they also great pricing, and they will get the job done quickly. Fully insured, obviously. You can reach them at the support page of the Final Four on the schedule.com/support. And of course, as a listener to the show, you get 15% off if you just mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And so it was 4-5. I had a slight lead, and I am going to come away with another win. So I got 2 in a row now. Maybe it's 3 in a row. I think it was like, yeah.
Yes, it's 3 in a row.
Yeah, I'm on a heater now. Probably the heat checks next. So I had Kohler and Cooper, and you had Sapala and Carr, and no matter how we would have done this, you would have lost because
Yeah.
Kohler had 10, Cooper just with 1, Sapala and Carr combined for 5 rebounds, and I mean, Kohler had 4 offensive rebounds. He almost had more offensive rebounds than Sapala and Carr combined rebounding. So we'll talk about rebounding, I guess, specifically when it comes later, but. Michigan State still cleaning glass pretty well, although not so well on the defensive end, but certainly offensively still keeping up the nice pace they've been doing so far.
Yeah, you're right. There was no other combination out there for me. Even if I'd had the foresight to pick the
Jeremy
smallest guy
Fears.
on the court for Michigan State, it still wouldn't have been enough.
Yeah, you had no chance. So
Yep.
we'll see how it goes next time for you. All right, so that brings us to the 5 keys to the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. I'm wearing my sweatshirt now. I'm down here in Florida. That's why I've got a weird background if you're watching on YouTube. And of course, as I was telling Rod before the show, whenever my family goes to visit places, we bring the cold weather. We've been to Las Vegas when it snows. We're now in Florida when my son turned to me and said, this is like the coldest it's been in Florida in 2 decades. So here we are. So I think I think the lows are going to be in the low 30s or almost 20s in some of these days we're here, with the highs struggling to reach in the 50s. So anyway, So I'm wearing my hoodie, so it's perfect. But this nudge printing stuff is really super comfortable, great pricing, super high quality. These are the best. All the nudge printing stuff. We've got a ton of stuff with our family. Whether it's a shirt, we got some t-shirts, we got coats. They got really cool hats, quarter zips. I got pretty much like all that stuff now. So they do all that. They've not only just Michigan State with all the different vintage logos and the current logos, but also other teams, other schools. So whether you've Big Ten schools like Indiana or Iowa, or any of the schools in the state of Michigan, for the most part, outside of the University of Michigan. Gabe and Brittany do everything out of Portland, Michigan, so it's all local. So it's a great business support and also great, fantastic products. And because you listen to the show, 20% off. You just type in Final Four as one word into checkout, and you can get your really cool stuff from Nudge Printing. So the first key to the game, and this is going to be actually really interesting as we go through these, because like you said, you kind of look at the box where you're kind of like, huh, how did this happen? And then here we are. So transition. So specifically, we're talking about fast breaks. This is one that Michigan State won the fast break points 9-7. They had, just because there's so many steals by Ohio State, they had 11-5 steal edge, which actually is kind of shocking that they only scored 7 points off 11 steals. Michigan State had 9 off of 5 steals, and one of those was that one that Booker took all the way for and one. Akins did that 1-on-3 where he had Michigan State, I think, pushed the pace. They definitely kept the game moving a little along at a pretty good pace, but I don't know. This is one that you look at and you're like, well, okay, it was a push.
Well, I think it was a disappointment, but I think the reason for it, or at least the biggest reason, is fairly obvious. And it's one we talked about as being something that was likely to happen, and then it didn't. If you can't cleanly rebound on the defensive end,
Right.
you're going to have trouble running.
Yeah.
And Michigan State gave up 15 offensive rebounds in this game. Way too many.
Yeah.
Way too many. Now, it's just, you can't put it any more simply than that. And that's why you just don't have the opportunities if you're not able to control the defensive glass. And so much of the reason that they've been able to run successfully this season has been because they've been so dominant on the defensive boards. And when they're not, it's hard to get it kickstarted. So that was a major disappointment in this one, no question.
Yeah. And I think, too, when you look at the turnovers, the nature of the turnovers, we've talked about this before. Michigan State has turnovers, but there are a lot of dead ball turnovers, legal screens, shot clock violations, stepping out of bounds, those sorts of things. That was majority of what Ohio State had this game. So that's why there were less free throw because of the poor rebounding. There were less fast break opportunities for Michigan State, obviously. So let's talk about the second key of the game, the boards, which my family turned to me because we're talking about all the offensive rebounds. Ohio State, because they're saying, this is your fault. You keep saying that these teams aren't good at offensive rebounding, and then they come out and get this. I'm like, well, that's not, I'm not.
Mostly that's not been the case this year.
No, I was just saying most of the year it's not been that way. It's just only been the last few games.
And Western was a good offensive rebounding team. That was not a total shocker. You hoped that Michigan State would do better than they did, but that was something Western's done all year. This is really the first time that I can think of this season. I guess I'd have to go back to see if there was another exception, but for the most part, this is the first time that we've seen a team that just has not done the job all year on the offensive boards do the job.
Yeah.
Now we said, maybe Aaron Bradshaw returning to the lineup makes a little bit of a difference for Ohio State, but I don't think he had one offensive rebound.
Yeah.
So
it was Stewart and it was Royal and Glover,
Stewart and Royal combined.
I mean, the kind of guys you expect Mahaffey.
Those three guys combined for 10 of their offensive rebounds. So and it's it's a 6'9" guy and 2 6'6" guys, but the 2 6'6" guys are the kind of 6'6" guys that can do damage. Right. They're both strong. They've got some toughness to them. There's no other way of putting it. Very disappointing. Now on the other end, I don't think Michigan State was fantastic, but 12 offensive actually pretty. What were did you do the percentages? Because they're probably pretty close.
They're identical. Yeah, Michigan State was 12 for 31 and Ohio State was 15 for 38. So it was like 38.97% or something like that for Michigan State. It was 39.47 for Ohio State. Essentially the same. They were both 39%.
Pretty much a push.
It was a push. Again, another push.
The problem is that was an area where you thought, well, Michigan State should have a distinct advantage.
Exactly. And that's why
And it wasn't
the
that.
next key is one we'll go through, and we'll talk about that right now. And that's turnovers. And this is
Yep.
one where Ohio State values the ball. They're very good from a turnover standpoint. I think they were 35th in turnover
Yep.
percentage. Michigan State was, I don't know, hundreds or something like that. They're not great. But they were pretty terrible this game. I mean, their turnover percentage, again, Michigan State was 23.2%, which is the worst they've been all season.
Yeah.
Not like bright red, but it's sort of like just a shade of red. So it's not very good for them. And so they have 16 turnovers. Michigan State has 16 turnovers. Michigan State gets 18 points off turnovers. Ohio State gets 16 points off turnovers. So a push, but just like the rebound, you expect an edge for Michigan State. Turnovers, you expect an edge for Ohio State. They're both pushes.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because normally that's an equation you feel you'd like it to be better, but you normally feel okay if you're in the Michigan State corner. You say, okay, if the scoring chances are more or less even, we're going to win most of our games because we're going to do a better job shooting the ball than the opponent will.
Right.
And so, but the thing was, coming into this game, Ohio State, actually, a real strength of this team has been the way they've shot the ball and the way they defended other teams shooting the ball. Their issues have been other things, like their ability to stop second shots or to generate second shots.
Right.
Their inability to keep people off the free throw line and then having opponents shooting a high percentage against them when they do get there. It's been things like that. The basics, the fundamentals, how well we shoot the ball and what we allow the other team to do when they shoot the ball. Ohio State's been really good. So, to be honest with you, if you told me, yeah, the scoring chances are pretty much going to be even, I might have felt a little nervous about that.
Yeah.
Be on the road, especially.
Yeah,
right. That too. Yep. The fact that, Michigan State and Ohio State both shoot twos very well, but Ohio State's had a huge edge shooting the three. But I think it was a testament to the way Michigan State defended.
You're like the segue king here because the next key to the game is free throw line. Do you know these keys before?
I didn't realize those were in the orders. Honest to God, I do these things stream of consciousness and then I forget. But so, I really didn't know. Yeah,
the free throw line is next, and to your point, that is exactly where their huge edge was. Michigan State was 18 for 22 at 80, almost 82%, which is I think exactly their season average.
That's what they do.
I think they started out 1 for 3. With Richardson and Fears both, and I think Richardson hit the second of his. They both split to start, and then they hit however many in a row until Akins missed one late, and then of course Carr missed his last one.
Right.
Ohio State 11 for 16, so they didn't get to the line as much as they usually do, but they hit about what they're usually do at 68.8%. But when we talked about the game before, your point was dead on. You said in a Big Ten game, road game, or whatever. Free throws, if you make 3-4 more free throws, that's the difference in the game. Well, they made 7 free throws more. And guess what the difference in the game was? 7 points.
100%. It's a huge deal. And that's going to be something that gets repeated over and over again this year. We're not used to Michigan State doing this. This is new. Really, for the Tom Izzo era, there might be a year where they were close, even remotely close, to what they're doing this year, not just in terms of the percentages. He's had other good free throw shooting teams before, but that married to the frequency with which they're getting there, that's a real rarity. And, normally we're looking at free throws, again, as an area kind of like turnovers in most of the past, where you look at it and say, okay, we expect we're going to be negative here, but we're going to make up for that in all these other areas. That was kind of the deal with free throws. You knew that the other team was probably going to shoot more than you. You hoped that the success rate that Michigan State had when they did get there would mitigate a lot of that edge, a lot of that difference. And there they'd make up for it with the way MSU shot threes or twos for both versus the opponent, the way they were able to defend, the way they were able to rebound. Those would be the equations. For this team, I think free throws are going to be this exact scenario is going to be a big, big deal. And there are other teams, I, I I see some other teams around the league. It's not just Ohio State that have some problem keeping opponents off the line. And if
Mhm.
Michigan State can continue to do this, and I don't see a reason why we should expect, you might have an off game here or there, but I think in general we've seen what the level is of this team, both in terms of how often they're getting there and then hitting them. I think it's going to be a big, big edge for them. And it's going
Yeah,
to allow them to ride out some difficulties in other areas. Now, look,
like
the night.
three-point shooting.
Well, but the nice thing with this team, we look at this performance tonight, right?
Yeah,
Didn't do the job at all on the defensive boards, and they really struggled with turnovers. It didn't really bite them because Ohio State had their own issues in those
hmm,
areas.
right,
So it wasn't
right.
like Ohio State had a significant, really, or much of an edge at all when you added it all up in those two facets of the game. But you would think Michigan State on the season, I feel very confident about the defensive rebounding getting back on track. The turnovers maybe a little less confidence because they've been right. It's been heading in the wrong direction for a little while now.
Yeah,
So they really got to lock in to feel good about that as you did maybe in the first month of the season. But if those two things happen and you continue doing this from the line, man, they're going to be they're going to be really hard to beat, really hard,
yeah,
because they're going to shoot well from two. They're going to stop other teams from shooting well. That's going to be a regular thing, not necessarily every time out, but it's going to show up far more often than not. And if you add in those other facets, that's a really, really tough equation to overcome. So I feel like Michigan State is really coming in with a lot of aces in their hands, so to speak.
yeah.
And the free throw line is a big one, no doubt.
Well, and I think we've talked about this many times. You've got with the rebounding and the free throw line, you now have a foundation which as you mentioned, it prevents you, it 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 allows you sort of opportunities to win games that you probably shouldn't. I mean, we're looking at a game where they won
Yep.
by 7 points in Columbus, and I don't want to say it was comfortable, but it's not. It was a two-possession game with a
Right.
minute left, and they won it, and it was. And you're like, well, all they do is make free throws. Well, you don't worry about that too much. It's like, can they just get it inbound and get across the timeline?
Yep.
We're probably fine. Uh, but you're winning these games playing not great. Like, I mean, I think you look at a lot of those things, you're like, yeah, there are a lot of things they have to clean up and make better. And if they play like this in the Sweet 16, they're going to lose because they're playing against better teams, at that point. But you can play kind of poorly in some aspects, like you said, and still win, and even win convincingly. On the road, it's pretty impressive.
And again, that I think we have reason to believe that some of the things, at least some of the things they didn't do well tonight, normally we know they do well.
Right. Yeah,
And
I agree.
so if they rebounded defensively the way they normally do, this might have been a 15-point win, 20-point win. I mean, if they did the job I expected them to do, because it wouldn't have even been just, the second chance points Ohio State then doesn't get. It also would have likely meant Michigan State gets more in transition on its offensive end. I think easily, if they rebounded defensively the way that we expect them to, this would have been an extremely comfortable win.
Yeah,
The
and
fact that they didn't do that and they still, as you say, won by 3 possessions, that's pretty good stuff.
and I don't. I, I think it's probably fair to say at this point, this team's probably going to be a 35% three-point shooting team. That's kind of like what they are, maybe 30. I mean, they're not there yet, so I don't think they're certainly not a 17% three-point shooting, which were tonight. And I do think they'll get better. But they start hitting a couple of those, and this game is, there are plenty of shots that they were wide open. They're ones that you expect them to bury. And at some point, I
Yes.
figure Booker's going to start hitting these. Maybe he won't, but I mean, he's definitely
Yeah,
hurts their average by
it's just
launching 4 a game when he has a chance, whenever he's open.
it's unfortunate that that's one big thing, and we haven't even really spent a lot of time on it because we didn't have it as a key. Um, it's now two straight games where they've been sub where they
35, we'll
want to
say.
be. Yeah, and this one way sub.
Yeah.
But you make up for it, and to some extent at least, by what happened at the other end, that Ohio State wasn't able to do much. You know, they took a
Hmm.
boatload of them. Ohio State took 27. That's way high
Yeah,
for
that's more
that
than their
team.
usual. Yeah.
And they just didn't hit them. And that was, I think, a lot of that was a lot of both the reason that they took that many and their lack of success was down to the way Michigan State defended. I really
Yeah.
do. It wasn't by accident. It just wasn't. It wasn't a team just missing open shots.
I mean, you can always shoot a three. They may not be good. They
Right.
might be 5
Well,
feet behind the line.
but that's why.
You can always
Right.
have open for that.
100%. And that's why, sometimes I think people struggle with this, but that's why people will say 3-point shooting success against is to some extent, and I think most would argue a significant extent, is a luck dependent number because not exclusively, but enough more so than really any other phase of the game if you're talking about defense. Because you're right, you can, if the offense really wants to pull a three, they can pull a three,
Yeah.
you know? And so the best number is how well you hold attempts down because that's most teams are not going to take threes that are well guarded, but they can if they choose to. So
Which they
that's
did this
why
game. Yeah.
even for that, you can't really totally control what the other team does in terms of attempts. You can just make it really tough on them, and I think that's what Michigan State did.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's, of course, the fifth key to the game was guarding the arc.
Yeah,
Ohio State shoots 39% for the season. They shoot 25.9% this game. And
huge.
that one they hit late was, to make it 4, which then Michigan State went down and hit a couple free throws after that. It was, I don't want to say lucky, but it was well guarded, well defended.
It was
I mean, Mobley
fortunate
hit it. Yeah. So
and from real distance. Now look, I mean, and the thing that is pretty remarkable too is if you look at Ohio State's numbers. So Micah Parrish, who I think came into the game shooting 32%,
I
so
was shocked to
not
hit that
great.
first one right away. Yeah.
Three for six. You take him out of the equation, they're 4 for 21.
Yeah.
So you have these are the guys who were big time shooters for them. Thornton 0 for 5, Mobley 2 for 7. Quest Glover had a good game at 2 for 5. Bradshaw for some reason took 3. He didn't hit any.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's
yeah, but I mean, holding Thornton and Mobley, both of those guys were right at or knocking on the door 50% from 3. And they were a combined 2 for 12. That's a big part of the result here is that the guys that they count on to hit those shots and who take a lot of them or fair amount at least, Michigan State completely held down.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say one other thing, which is not related to these keys, but sort of a little bit because, Michigan State not hitting the three and they didn't continue chucking them up. They were very good, not only with Fears getting in the lane, but also with passing from Kohler. It's amazing how much he's progressed and Zapata to some extent.
Yep.
The interior passing between those two guys, they definitely have a good feel for each other. When one gets it double team, but Kohler's ability to recognize double team, see it coming, and immediately get out of it and get the ball fired away is very good. Zapata had a lot of trouble. He had a couple throwaways today, but Kohler has really gotten a lot better with that. It's very. I mean, I'm as impressed with that as I am with the fact that his finishing is one thing. I thought that eventually would come, but his ability to move on defense and then also his ability now to pass not only to guards but also to other big men has really been pretty impressive development this year.
I think that it is fair to say that he's probably had about as much improvement in that area of the game as any Michigan State big I can think of in recent memory. Now, that said, some guys came to Michigan State already really, really good. Zach Randolph didn't need to improve very much in that facet of the game. Derek Nix did not need to improve very much. They came to Michigan State with a great sense of court vision, a sense of timing,
Yeah.
and the ability to beat doubles with the pass. But a guy like Nick Ward, the
Never
most he
got it.
could do, well, the most he was able to do is last year he was able to get to the point that he could mostly do what I call survive
Yeah, escape.
possessions. But he wouldn't punish it. You got to be able to make the other team pay for doing that. And Jackson, Jackson's not perfect. We've seen him still at times this year struggle with it a little bit, but the improvement has been significant. There's no question. And I think with his work ethic, we look at the way his game has improved in totality. It's not unreasonable to imagine that next year he's going to be even better.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. He's made real strides, and that doesn't always happen. Before this year, I would have said that's another one of those things that, yeah, I think you can get better at it to some extent, but it's mostly intuitive and feel, because it is field based. Like you oftentimes the double that comes at that big is coming from a blind spot. Like he's not actually able to see that defender, or at least see them clearly.
Right.
He has to feel it.
Yep.
And some guys have that ability to feel it, and some guys don't. And I would have said, well, I haven't seen any indications that Jackson really has that feel. But I don't say that anymore, because I think he's shown that, well, however he's managed to develop that, whether it's through reps or he always had it, just other things were making it appear that, he was out of sorts or uncomfortable, not confident, whatever it is. But he's a guy that can be a weapon now. I don't think there's much doubt about that.
All right. Well, again, Michigan State moves up to 12-2 for the season, and 3-0 in the Big Ten. So great start to this year, and
Yeah.
we'll expect for more, I think, for at this point. The only other thing I'd like to add is my wife, which I don't know if you've ever heard this. So do you ever hear the cheerleaders when you're listening to these games?
What's that?
Do you ever notice the cheerleaders? Like, I mean, you hear them like say go, whatever, right?
I mean,
You just like
yeah,
you may
sure.
like vaguely know they're saying things. So my wife is really irritated by the Ohio State cheerleaders, and because we go to the Big Ten tournament a lot of times, that she hears them and she must pay attention to them more than I do, because she's like, they have the dumbest cheer. They have the cheer that says, "We want a 2 or a 3." It drives her insane. She's like, the dumbest cheer ever. It's like a total like brainless cheerleader cheer. So I don't know, but I'm like, I don't even hear that on the broadcast. It's amazing. She's like, oh, you can't, how do you not hear that? So anyway,
it's funny. I have more probably because I was in greater proximity to the floor frequently, but I have more recollection of high school
right.
cheers. Like I can still vividly remember from my high school days going to watch a state, must have been a quarterfinal at Jenison, and the late lamented Detroit Cooley High School had a cheer that went COOLEY, 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 Cooley High. And that's one that is, for whatever dumb reason, is stuck in my mind for about 40 years. So
And I guess
anyway,
we'll head to our grave without these now. And now I'm sure every time I watch an Ohio State game, I will hear that cheer and be bothered by it. So
yeah,
our spouses are great, aren't they? All right, so we'll get out of here. We'll talk again before the Washington game when Michigan State returns back to Breslin to try and keep things rolling.
a nice little break too. 6
It
days.
is like a little 6-day break. Which
Yeah.
I feel like they keep having these breaks between these games.
Yeah.
And I know then it's going to come fast and furious. We're going to be recording like all the time. It'll be it'll be interesting. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.